They're joining me now from the United States is Professor Mark Tomass, an adjunct professor at Harvard University. Professor Tomass, thank you very much for joining us. Indeed, a crucial day today. Important summit is underway here in Ankara. The three presidents just read out their opening statements for the trilateral summit, and they all agreed on one point that they will respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Syria. So, according to you, what would be an ideal outcome of the summit?
Well, first of all, I am happy to hear the declarations of principles, and that is everybody will respect the territorial integrity of Syria. Now, that has implications. What I hope that the outcome is going to be also respecting the principles. What I hope will happen is that the three parties would agree on a strategy on how to deal with the U.S. presence in the Eastern Euphrates, because that is the main obstacle to these declarations of principles. So far we haven't heard anything, and there is nothing qualitatively different between this year and last year. Last year, almost we had an identical meeting, and in that meeting it was agreed on that Turkey will have observation points in the region of Idlib, and that the rebels would be withdrawing north and to the west, so that they will allow the opening up of the Aleppo-Damascus highway and the Aleppo-Latakia highway. Now, that didn't happen. It's a big question mark as to why that didn't happen. I can only conclude from what happened on the ground that the Turkish troops didn't have much influence over these rebels. And I'm talking specifically here about Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda didn't listen, and it stuck its positions, and it basically continued what it was doing. So here is the big question: is how do you deal with the situation? And the Syrian government and the Russians decided that they would carry out the offensive, and they did. And I think the same model, you can see the same model to continue in the future with everything else equal, with the rebels not changing their attitude. So the question here is, what do you expect? Well, all of you are right in what I've been hearing, that there will be a refugee problem, further refugee problem. So what do you do with it? This is a serious issue, and it looks like nobody has any practical solution to it. I believe what should happen is there should be more inclusion of Europe into this discussion. Europe and the United States, and maybe even the other countries that funded the rebels in the past, such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar. All of these people who have converted this initial protest into an armed...
If I could interfere and ask you, how can we expect the inclusion of the United States when its president himself has said it on multiple occasions that he wants the United States out of Syria?
Well, he said that, but obviously didn't happen, right? So the question is, we have to figure out what's happening in the White House and who is running what, and why the United States decided to take a different course of what its president had intended at the beginning. So in other words, it is an open question. We have to go. I mean, people who are interested in implementing these principles that were just declared right now, they would have to find a mechanism by which to talk to the United States to figure out how to resolve it peacefully, right? And if the answer becomes negative, then one could look into other options. But so far, it looks like there is no communication between these three parties and the United States. I don't know who could be a better candidate. I presume Russia and Turkey would be candidates in opening up some sort of dialogue to see what is on the mind of the United States. But again, having said that, remember we have spoken about this before. The key force here is Israeli security. So what the United States says now is going to reflect what the Israelis are telling them. So what the Israelis are telling the U.S. administration. you would have to come up, and you would have to come up with an understanding with Israel as to why it wants eastern Syria to be separated from the rest of Syria. What kind of guarantees it wants, so that it will abandon the project of establishing a separate state in the northeast, actually the entire east of Syria. So who is a candidate to do or to open up these channels of dialogue? Otherwise, it's all going to be talk. The United States is not willing to anger Israel in any means, and you must have been hearing. For example, there was the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared an agreement that is going to be signed soon between the United States and Israel on a mutual defense agreement. Now, we all believe that there is some tacit mutual defense agreement, but that is going to be formalized now. In other words, the U.S. is going to be behaving or acting in Syria almost like Israel. So therefore, there is no way out other than speaking with Israel and see what does it really want from Syria.
All right, Professor, now let's revisit the topic of Idlib. It is the focal point of today's summit, and I believe it is pivotal in bringing this Syrian conflict to an end. So far, Russia and Iran have cooperated with the Syrian regime in launching an offensive in Idlib. And it is pretty clear now that an offensive in Idlib would result in a refugee influx into Turkey. Even today, in the opening statement, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made it very clear. So, do you think Russia has a plan to take Turkey's support in it?
I think if you look at the past three years, for example, since 2015, when Russia intervened, the strategy has been similar in retaking all of the territories that used to be controlled by the rebels. I think Russia doesn't have any other plan. I think it's going to be the same as before. Both Russia and the Syrian government have no particular plans on how to handle the refugees. For that reason, I think there has to be, there has to be other parties, such as, for example, Europe, who should be willing to provide some temporary shelters. For example, build some prefabricated housing in areas where the refugees could flee and could occupy until all of the area is cleared from rebels, and so that later on they decide what to do. So I don't think anybody has any particular plan, and I understand Turkey's fears that.
I mean, that would be an ideal scenario for Europe, and I believe that would be an ideal scenario for Russia and Iran. But do you think that's really possible, given the fact, given the recent statements made by the Turkish authorities? Because they have made it very clear this time that Turkey will not take any more refugees.
Yeah, well, too bad for the refugees. Where are they going to go? Because, as I said, the model to take back these areas are bombardment and then gradual movement into the rebel territories, like what happened in Khan Sheikhoun last month. So it looks to me that the parties are not working on resolving the refugee issue. They are just talking about it, but they don't have any practical measures on how to handle it. And I understand what Turkey is saying, that it wants to open up its borders towards Europe so that the refugees could flood there. Maybe it would do that. In the absence of anything practical, probably that's what will happen. For me, being here in the United States and just having ideas about how to resolve it, it wouldn't probably help. But I don't know why people there who are handling the conflict, why they are not thinking about it in practical terms. Because look, there is no way that you could expect the Syrian government to give in to any demands of having that region of Idlib to turn into a republic or some emirate controlled by al-Qaeda. So that is out of the question. they are going to take that territory one way or the other. The problem is that you have about 50,000 armed people, armed rebels, who are controlling 3 million people. They are holding them like human shields. So, from the past, given the past behavior of the Syrian government, along with the Russian cooperation with the Russian Air Force, it didn't seem that they care about the consequences on the refugees. And I think the same model will be taking place in the future. So, given that fact, don't expect these negotiations to lead to any concessions from the part of the Syrian government. They are going to retake that, and they will be retaking that through military means. Given the fact that there is no other plan to have these rebels surrender or do something with them. The rebels, they continue to say one day after the other that they are there to stay, and they have their own plans to retake all of the territories that they have lost. And look into all of these channels that are representing them indirectly. They think that this is as if day one of the conflict. They are not thinking that it is year 8 of the conflict, right? So everybody has people supporting them, and they are going on the same route. Just a few days ago, one of the rebel leaders didn't split, but he made a video and where he accused the Al-Qaeda leaders that they have just taken $100 million. Apparently, he had no share in this $100 million, so he was very upset about it. Here's the big question: who is still supporting these groups? Who is providing them with arms? Who is providing them with tow missiles? So there are some parties that are providing them in secret, and we don't know who is. That situation has to be addressed. And unfortunately, I don't have anything other than that to say that the Europeans, all of the countries that supported the rebels, they should pay, and they should put up these prefabricated houses so that they should take this flood in. And I think the idea of establishing or resettling some of the refugees in the north of Syria, as I told you last time, the Syrian government agrees with that because it was a plan that they wanted to implement since the 1970s. Then things went sour because of other complications between the relationship between Syria and Turkey. But you see, they would agree with that. So maybe these houses should be built in these areas. It wouldn't take more than 1 month or 2 months to build these. So maybe that would be one way of channeling the refugees towards that area until Idlib is until the rebels are taken out.
Professor, since you have mentioned Europeans, let me ask you, do you think that the Europeans are directly complicit in reinforcing the current turmoil of Syria?
My feeling is that the Europeans are not actively engaged in that, but they have no will to take any decision that is independent of the United States. And the United States has totally ignored the condition of Idlib. The United States is focusing on eastern Syria, and the Europeans are just doing nothing. I really don't think there is a active unified European effort to do anything about the Syrian conflict. So I wouldn't put much hope into that, but I think there should be some diplomatic channels opened. There should be some sort of pressure put on the Europeans to provide help. Otherwise, they will end up with more refugees, which also the idea that they don't like. So I think they should listen to what's happening. They should listen to what people are saying, both in Turkey, in Russia, in Iran, in Syria, about the conflict, and they should do something practical. And again, the United States probably should put pressure both on Saudi Arabia and on Qatar to provide funds to build these temporary shelters for the refugees. So I would not put much hope on what the Europeans
Professor Mark Tomass,
will do voluntarily.
Okay, Professor Mark Tomass, I was just speaking to one of our previous guests, and I asked him what would be an ideal outcome of the summit for Turkey. He said that reaching a ceasefire agreement for Idlib would be ideal. But do you think that's possible after hearing you?
No.
I think from your perspective, it won't be possible for Turkey, isn't it?
No, it would not be possible to have a ceasefire, as I said, because what would a ceasefire accomplish? We will continue in the same situation that we were last year and the year before. So I think it is not. I mean, you cannot expect a ceasefire because this means that the status quo would continue. Now, unless you say let's have a ceasefire and we, meaning maybe Turkey, will resolve the rebel area, will resolve the situation, the military situation in Idlib. I don't see that happen. That's happening because it didn't happen in the past year. I mean, if the rebels didn't listen to Turkey and didn't withdraw more inwards in order to open up the highways, I don't see why they should listen now. So who is going to engage these rebels? You cannot just sit and let them run these schools or run them like the way Saudi Arabia was running their schools in the past 40 years. You cannot expect them to sit and indoctrinate people and create, make that region as a small emirate with a completely different education, different culture from the rest of the region. And we must take into consideration, despite all of the disagreements between the leadership of Syria and Turkey, the people of Syria and Turkey have very similar cultural background in terms of their attitude towards Muslim law, their attitude towards religion. They are more moderate. They are not in line with all of these hardliners that are ruling this area. So why would Turkey want these people to live there and to stay there and to establish an emirate? Exactly for the same reason why the Syrian government wouldn't want, I think Turkey wouldn't want too. But what is next? What is going to happen? If Turkey is not going to disarm these people, who is going to disarm them? So I really don't see a ceasefire to be any reasonable outcome of this summit. They may say,
okay,
no,
Professor,
they may say we decide on a ceasefire, but
while I was
nobody will
listening
follow
to the opening statements. Yeah, so when I was listening to the opening statements of the leaders, they all said one thing: removal of terrorism from Syria. Now, Idlib is, of course, one focal point of this summit. Another one is finding a permanent solution to the Syrian conflict. And I think a constitutional committee would be responsible for doing so. What is the progress on it at the moment? Are you satisfied with what's being done with regards to the Constitutional Committee?
I am afraid it's more of a cosmetic thing. It's more of a cosmetic process because many of the, let's say, the unarmed opposition groups, the political figures, the people who have defected, those who are sitting outside Syria, they have been asking for a constitutional reform, for something to happen. Yeah, I mean, I don't really see I don't see that, again, taking place. I don't see any major reform taking place other than what we have right now. The point is, what do you expect from a constitutional reform or a new constitution? Do you expect that the current regime to abdicate and to have a completely different kind of government? No, the answer is no. Again, the same thing is because there was an armed conflict, and the Syrian government reinstated its control over much of its territories, not all of them, militarily. They are not going to give in any power to some constitutional committee that will meet and say this and say that. So the bottom line is this, and maybe people don't want to hear it. Syria will have to remain secular. So any constitutional reform, if it does not clearly state that Syria will have to be a secular state, I think it will not be accepted by the Syrian government, and therefore it will not be accepted by its backers. And by its backers here, I mean maybe more Russia than Iran, because Iran may still not want may still favor a government different than a secular government. But that would not be the case for Russia. So because Russia still has the upper hand, and the Air Force is the major factor that controls the movement on the ground, So I think the demand for a secular constitution would be paramount. The second big issue is about the leadership. Would we expect the current president to give up power and to resign and to have a new election from the beginning and so on? I think that is, again, very unlikely. I think, according to the current constitution, he has another 7 years after his term comes up. And most likely, if elections take place, it's the same what happened in the last election. He will also be re-elected. So I don't see the Syrian government or Syrian regime, the head of the Syrian regime, the President Bashar al-Assad, to actually leave power just because a constitutional committee said something about having a totally new election with him not running for election. I think he would probably accept if the constitutional committee would say that he still has the right to run once again as it was with the current constitution. And the rest of the elements of the constitution will be cosmetic. Of course, it will have to have, it will remove the monopoly of the Ba'ath Party, monopoly of the Ba'ath Party in ruling Syria, which is, again, this has been accepted already in the constitution that was drafted earlier and adopted earlier. So on the face of it, the Syrian government accepts the fact that the Ba'ath Party should not have a monopoly over power. The question is practically how is that going to turn? That is, when you have election, are other parties going to act freely? Are they going to be able to advertise? Are they going to have candidates who would freely run for election without government supervision? That's the big question. And I think the Syrian government should give in into that they will allow free elections in the coming presidential elections.
Okay, Professor Mark Tomass, now I'm moving towards my last question. Turkey has many concerns when it comes to Syria. One of it is in northern Syria. Now, Turkey has proposed the formation, the establishment of a safe zone in northern Syria. And I asked you this question before as well, but Turkey is still skeptical about the U.S. playing its role in the establishment of a safe zone. You said that the United States has turned a blind eye to the issue of Idlib. Do you think the U.S. would do the same with northern Syria?
I hope it would do the same after the firing of John Bolton, that there will be somebody new who, or President Trump will appoint somebody who thinks in line with his thoughts, who would do what he wants to do, and not somebody who has his own agenda. And so, I mean, if you actually look at what happened in the summits between President Putin and President Trump in the past, President Trump practically has given President Putin a free hand in Syria. Has given him free hand in the sense that you have more pressing interests than we as the United States in this region. You know it better. The Syrian conflict has taken too long. It is time to end it. And so the implicit agreement was that there will be a restoration of Syrian sovereignty everywhere in Syria. And that they ended it there. And then suddenly, again, you go in with Bolton and Pompeo persuading President Trump to leave some troops in Syria and keep on with the same plan as they had before. So what would it take? So the question is, what would it take for President Trump to insist on the withdrawal from Syria and restoring Syrian sovereignty in the eastern part of Euphrates? And we end up with what we had before the war started. And I think here, again, the key is Israel. You would have to persuade Israel that the restoration of Syrian sovereignty in the eastern Euphrates should not be a threat to Israel, and that the continuation of the current situation maybe is more of a threat to Israel than the restoration of Syrian sovereignty. Why? Because as long as the civil war, or the war, let me say, this is not just a civil war, it is an international war taking place on Syrian ground. As long as it continues, there will be armed militias coming from everywhere into Syria, and that is generally not good for Israel. Israel shouldn't want in the long run to see everyone in Syria engaged in an ongoing war where everybody is having more experience in entering towns, entering cities, and depopulating them, taking them over, because it can think of similar scenarios that could take place between Syria and Israel. What Israel has to ask itself, why would it be in its interest for the war to continue? If Israel thinks that the continuation of the war in Syria is in its interest because people are fighting each other, they are therefore getting weakened. That is not the case. Syria and the Arab and the Muslim world don't have a problem with population. If people are dying there, this doesn't mean that they are going to be weaker. To the contrary, they are gaining more military experience, and that is not good for Israel in the long run. So I think it is in Israel's best interest for the Syrian government sovereignty to be restored on the entire geography. That way, there will be no reason for the Iranian militia or the, let's say, Iranian-backed militia to be in Syria. These people will be asked to withdraw, and they will withdraw. And there will be obviously no reason for the Russian Air Force to act in any way. Of course, they will keep their base in Latakia and Tartus, and that will be it. Then we will get back to where we were, and maybe we can work on some sort of peace agreement with Israel for it to give up the Golan Heights, and we have maybe some sort of normalization then.
Professor, now very quickly, I'm running short on time. In just 2 minutes, I'd like to ask you again: what would be a desirable, what would be an ideal outcome of this summit, according to you?
An ideal outcome would be to come up with a practical plan of what to do with the refugees. Because, as I told you, the military operation is going to continue. Even if they stop for 1 month or 2 months, it's going to be a tactical decision. The military offensive is going to continue, and as a result, the refugees are going to flood from one place to another. So they have to have, the best outcome would be for them to have a practical solution of what to do with it, what to do with the flux of the refugees. Maybe they shouldn't go into Turkey. Maybe they should open corridors directly into the east, where they would be going into the east, either in northern Syria or maybe to the north of Aleppo. Something practical like that. That would be meaningful. Other than that, it would be just talk like the summit of last year.
Something practical. All right, Professor Mark Tomass, thank you very much for taking out the time to talk to us on this special broadcast. We really appreciate your analysis, as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck for everyone.